Hi everyone, welcome back to All Things Microsoft Cloud video series. My name is Ayca. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I have Donna and Dan with me. Hi Dan, what we're going to talk about today?
Well, we have Donna here as our special guest to talk about accessibility within the Microsoft Cloud. But before we jump into that, Donna, tell us about yourself.
Hello, it's good to see you again. We got homework, don't you worry. Okay, my name is Dona Sarkar. I lead the accessibility tech team for Microsoft. So what that means is that I sit in the central hub within the organization, within all of Microsoft, and I look after all of our 4,000 products and our 3,500 internal products. So looking at like the time off tool, for example, the expense tool, and all of these like vital things. But overall, I look after 7,500 products across the Microsoft suite.
A lot of products.
It's a lot of products. But I will tell you, my favorite space is looking at dev tools and citizen dev tools, because by making sure those are accessible, you're actually enabling the next generation of people to become developers and citizen devs. So that's been my individual contributor, let's say, focus. And I love where all of us are headed in that direction.
Wow.
That's excellent.
This is very cool. And we know that developers are really into building solutions in cloud and Microsoft Cloud in general. How does accessibility fit into the Microsoft Cloud story?
Okay, I'm so happy you asked this, because it's kind of this overarching Lord of the Rings situation, okay? Where the Microsoft Cloud is, of course, like, Azure, Power, M365, name a cloud, all the clouds. But accessibility fits in across all of them. Because we can't have a Microsoft Cloud that's not accessible. That would be weird, right? Because you're saying, pretty much if you do that, you're saying, we don't actually care about like 1.5 billion people. That's less good. So accessibility kind of plugs into each one. A place that people already think of accessibility is in M365, because that suite of products is really useful in offices. So people with disabilities tend to be this job called a knowledge worker. So that means they're experts at like Excel or Word or PowerPoint or that sort of thing. They use Teams to communicate, Office Suite, Outlook, the whole thing. So M365 is pretty much solved. When you're looking at Azure, that's when things get interesting, because every Azure service we implement is accessible by design now. So I don't know if you know, but the Azure portal is known as a delightful experience for screen reader users.
That's great.
Yeah, awesome. They've gone through this entire process of working with screen reader users to make sure that it's accessible by design from the beginning. So Azure portal, and then of course, I'm super biased, but the Power Platform as well is accessible for folks who may have a screen reader needs, may have limited mobility, but accessibility touches every single part of the Microsoft Cloud. And when you're building a new service, or whether you're connecting services together, it's really important to think about, how will a person who might be a screen reader user, a keyboard shortcut user, a captions user, be able to use my product or this content that I'm creating?
That's great to hear. I have a son with some disabilities, and so our focus on getting that right. I actually didn't know about the portal, what you mentioned, and that's that's great to hear, and I'm all for it. So it's great to hear. When it comes to if I am a developer, I mean, obviously I can try to do my due diligence to make sure my apps are accessible and things like that. But what are some scenarios you can think or tell us about that would help me as a developer maybe expand into things I haven't even thought of before?
Right. So one of the things to keep in mind is, you don't actually know who's going to use the app or the web page or the web app or whatever it is that you're building, right? We seem to think that people with exactly our own set of skill sets are going to use this thing, right? So there's some really obvious things, like colorblind people. 1 in 7 men, 1 in 12, some small number are colorblind. So if you rely on your app's colors to dictate things, you're actually putting a lot of people at disadvantage, right? You're saying like, hey, click on the red button. People are like, what is that? So you also want to label it red, something like that. So that's a really obvious one. And we've realized that more people are colorblind than we even think. Do you know many men didn't even know they're colorblind until they started changing colorblind filters in Windows and saying like, wait, I can't actually see this. There's no difference to me between green and blue. Am I colorblind? We hear this all the time. It happens constantly. My colleagues right? This happens to my colleagues, our customers. So the number of people who are discovering that they have like some sort of disability, it's not a bad word, it's just a fact.
No, not at all.
That's very, very common. So that's an example. Another one is when you think about people who may have had like an accident or like, they broke their wrist. I got a ping recently from one of our product managers saying, I broke my wrist. I have to use dictation. I also have to use keyboard shortcuts with this hand because I can't use a mouse. Help. And I said, okay, cool. So you're using accessibility features. And they're like, okay, cool. This is so interesting. And a big part of it is, can you navigate your entire app with keyboard, right? Because if you can do that, you can navigate with voice. And that's really, really compelling and it's quite interesting. And it's really a bunch of basic, simple things, like make sure every object has a label that's identifiable. Make sure there's a logical tab order for every single element on your app. Because if you're not making these things accessible, like reachable by technology that's not a mouse, you're leaving out an enormous part of the audience.
Yeah.
The other just practical thing is if you put name values on things and have logical tab orders, if you're going to run any sort of automation, like UI automation, you can also do that fairly easily. For testing your app, it becomes much, much easier. I know, no one knew this, right? And so those are some logical things. This manifests itself whether you're using it, building like a .NET app or a Power app or anything like that. Just make sure that every single thing in the screen that is visible is accessible by keyboard and that you can tab through it in a logical order.
Well, an interesting thing there, real quick to wrap up, is I don't know if as a developer, either of you have tried, but you probably have, try to use like Visual Studio, VS Code, whatever, one day, like not use a mouse.
Right.
And you can.
Yeah.
And it's amazing actually how much, I don't know, more productive you feel once you get those memorized. Now, I'll have to admit, I still love my mouse.
Oh, yeah.
And I still use it. But it's good that you could do that.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. One other thing I'll tell you is we're just at the beginning of this accessibility for devs work because we're realizing that the more accessible you make dev tools, the more accessible products you're going to create, right? Because when you empower people with disabilities, such as your son and so many of my colleagues, to become developers or citizen developers, the products they're going to make are kind of going to be accessible by design because it's working for them. So it broadens the net of people we bring into our workforce and the number of people who can be devs in the first place. So that to me has been really fascinating. But I've been messing around a lot, and you too should try this, with GitHub Copilot, okay? I think Copilot is probably one of the greatest accessibility tools in the world, and we don't think about it that way, right? So imagine you can now dictate a line of code and it auto-completes for you. It's pretty cool. So I use Windows H and Copilot, and I can dictate lines and lines and lines of code, which is very fascinating. And when I have some of my voice coder friends get access to it, they're like, this is a game changer. This completely changes so much of my workflow. So I'm not having to dictate every line of code, but getting so much, for free. Same with screen reader users. So
awesome.
Yeah, so Copilot's like absolute game changer. We're at the very, very beginning of it.
Donna, I'm sure that there are a lot of things that we can do to make our apps more accessible. So where's the place we go as developers to learn more about accessibility?
So I'll say that one thing, cool party trick, by the way. If you're building a web app, you can put Immersive Reader into it. Okay, so what Immersive Reader does is it's like that Edge read aloud thing where it will highlight any word, make it big, and read it out loud to you. So say you're building a web app and you want to put in like dyslexic mode, you embed the Immersive Reader Azure service into it. It's just like this many lines of JavaScript right into your web app. It's pretty cool. I did this as a demo in like 5 minutes, and everybody in this conference, it was a disability conference, is like, what? Is this magic? I said, no, it's an Azure service and it's not actually magic. It feels magical though, right? Because when you can have any web app that you write read aloud to you in dyslexic mode, or like I speak a foreign language mode, right? It's immensely helpful for so many people. So check out the Immersive Reader Azure service. It's my favorite. I'm dyslexic, so that's why. So you were asking in terms of resources. we are, like, to be honest, gathering up a bunch of resources and also creating a whole new batch of resources. So I'll have a much better answer for you in 6 months. But right now, I would love for everyone to check out aka.ms dev-accessibility. And you can see a URL here right at the bottom.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course.
Ayca, great to chat with you.
Yes.
Donna, that was some amazing wisdom on accessibility. And I'm so glad to hear that so many of the products that, what was it, 7,500 or something like that, you oversee. And I'm glad you oversee them because you're obviously very passionate about this.
Oh, yeah. It's okay. So I will leave you with one thing. Everyone will become disabled at some point or another. Just some of us beat you to it. So build the world you want to see. Right? As devs, we are control freaks. Let's build the world we plan to live in someday. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining us in the All Things Microsoft Cloud. We'll see you in the other videos.